Have you ever felt like you were standing before a wall so high that not even your faith could climb it, as if all your prayers were hitting a ceiling and bouncing back, and the heavens remained silent? It's in that darkness where this story begins, and maybe that's exactly where yours begins too. On a quiet Friday morning, beneath the cold, stained glass windows of St. Peter's Basilica, Pope Leo XIV summoned his closest team for an unscheduled meeting. His face looked different. Gone was the diplomatic posture of a head of state. There were tears, there was weight, and there was a piece of paper in his hand, sealed with an ancient symbol, a seal none of those present had ever seen before. He asked everyone to sit, and then he said, "This is my final public letter, not due to illness nor resignation, but because I was touched by the impossible." No one dared interrupt him. The world outside was in war, in crisis, in spiritual collapse. But inside that sanctuary, something far deeper was about to be revealed. Leo XIV shared that for the past few weeks he had been awakened every morning at exactly the same time, 4:44 a.m., always with the same sound, the sound of a door opening somewhere. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but on the fourth night, when he opened his eyes, he saw before him a man clothed in linen, holding a scroll, with eyes that seemed to contain stars. "Your faith has been measured, and your answer is on the way." The man vanished, but the scroll remained on the floor. On it, there was a single verse, written in ancient Hebrew. "Behold, I have set before you an open door, which no one can shut." Revelation 3:8. The Pope fell to his knees, not out of fear, but out of certainty. He understood that God was about to intervene, not with words, but with action, and not just in his own life, but in the lives of all those on the edge of collapse, ready to give up. Leo XIV's final speech was not a farewell. It was a prophetic announcement. God is going to open an impossible door, and that door has your name on it. You who are hearing this now may be exactly at that breaking point, where everything feels stuck, where there are no more resources, no more plans, no more ways out. But maybe what God is about to do in your life doesn't need a key. It just needs faith. What does it mean to hear a prophet speak when he no longer speaks as an authority, but as a man? That was exactly what made Leo XIV's final speech so impactful. There were no microphones, no cameras. Just an empty confessional, a lit candle, and a voice that trembled, not with fear, but with revelation. "The door that God will open," he said, "is not a physical one, but it will change everything physical." Most expected a diplomatic speech, a political statement, a symbolic prayer. But what came from the Pope's mouth was a confession few would dare make. He, too, had doubted. For months, Leo XIV had battled in silence with an unexplained pain. It was not an illness of the body. It was something deeper, a blockage in the spirit. He said that in his nightly prayers he felt as if something was surrounding him, as if heaven's blessings were trapped behind an invisible wall. It was in that moment of absolute silence that he cried out, "Lord, why don't you answer? Why do you keep the doors of your promise shut?" The answer didn't come as a voice, but as a vision. That night, the Pope dreamed of a dark hallway, full of locked doors, and at the end, a single door stood open with a bright light so intense it was impossible to look at directly. He approached it, but before stepping through, he heard a voice say, "Only those who have lost everything may enter." Leo XIV awoke in tears. He understood there are doors that only open for the broken, for the rejected, for those who've been wounded from every side and still remain standing. And maybe that's why you're hearing this now, because you too are facing locked doors, because you've already tried all the human keys, resumes, spiritual credentials, promises, fasting, effort, strategies, and nothing has worked. But hear this. God's impossible doesn't follow human logic. The door He's about to open in your life won't be due to the connections you have, but the secret cry no one heard. It won't be opened by your strength, but by your surrender. And maybe everything you lost, was just so you could reach this one door. Because God didn't bring you this far to abandon you before the impossible. He brought you here because the impossible is where He reveals who He is. Have you ever noticed how God's silence can be more deafening than any scream? That's what consumed Leo XIV's heart in the days following that vision. The dark hallway, the open door at the end, the voice saying, "Only those who have lost everything may enter." These images returned night after night. It was as if God were engraving a message into his spirit, drop by drop, until he finally understood. But there was something even more disturbing. The Pope didn't know what door the vision referred to. It wasn't a literal door. It wasn't a trip or a project. It was something beyond, something that transcended the Vatican, papal responsibilities, geopolitical problems, and even the crises of modern faith. It was personal. He began to review his own life in prayer, his decisions, his alliances, his inner vows. And that's when something emerged from the darkness, a long-forgotten memory from his youth, back when he was still just a seminarian, hidden away in the cold corridors of a small chapel on the outskirts of Jerusalem. There, kneeling before a simple wooden cross, he had once made a prayer long forgotten amid the duties, the power, and the applause. "Lord, if I ever lose my way, close every door in the world except yours. Daesh." It was as if the Holy Spirit himself whispered that memory into his ears. And then he understood. It wasn't God who had gone silent. It was he who had drifted from the main door. How many times in your life have you also found yourself chasing after beautiful, promising, illuminated doors, but they were false, doors that looked like opportunities, but were actually traps, doors that shone on the outside, but hid darkness within, doors that promised status, pleasure, or escape, but left you emptier than before. The word says, "I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture." John 10:9. That was the truth that broke Leo XIV. He had forgotten that it wasn't his role to open the doors of the world, but that there was one eternal door, alive, made of flesh and blood, that had already been opened on Golgotha. And that door is Jesus. The Pope stood from that room and wrote with his own hands, "The impossible door is not a miracle that will come. It is a reunion with who I've always been." Maybe that's what God is trying to show you now, that the real miracle isn't the door of a job, a marriage, a ministry, or a solution, but the door that reconnects you to the Lamb, the only door that has never been closed to those who cry out with a broken heart. Because when you walk through that door, all the others become possible. Would you be willing to lose everything if you knew God was leading you to a door that no one else could enter on your behalf? That was the question that echoed in Pope Leo XIV's mind during the week that followed his silence. No letters were written, no public statements were made. The entire Vatican came to a halt. It was as if time had been suspended, and the spiritual realm was waiting for the next move. While everyone expected a political decision, Leo XIV descended alone into the crypts of the old apostolic archive, a place where few popes ever dared enter alone, a labyrinth of stone, mold, and shadows. But it was there, beneath the soil of Rome, that he found what he needed. It wasn't a manuscript, it wasn't a prophecy, it was an old mirror hanging on the wall behind a dusty red curtain. No one knew why the mirror was there, but when he looked into it, something supernatural happened. He didn't see his current reflection. He saw himself young again, kneeling in that Jerusalem chapel, praying that forgotten prayer. And the image spoke, "The door you want is not the door I prepared." The impact was so great that the Pope collapsed to his knees on the cold floor. It wasn't just a mirror, it was a portal, a confrontation, a revelation. Because sometimes God doesn't give you what you ask for, because he's preparing you for something infinitely greater than you dared to imagine. And you? Have you ever considered that maybe your current frustration is actually divine protection? That the doors that closed in your face, friendships, opportunities, plans that seemed perfect, were in fact spiritual locks preventing you from entering places that would destroy you from the inside? Leo XIV understood this late, but he understood. He rose from the crypts and climbed the stairs in silence. He ascended, as one who bears an invisible cross on his shoulders. When he reached the dome of the basilica, where few have access, he knelt before the cross suspended above the altar, and there, for the first time in many years, he didn't pray as pope, nor as priest, he prayed as a son. Father, don't open the door I want. Open the door that leads me back to you. And maybe that's the prayer you need to pray now. Because the impossible door you've been seeking so desperately might not be on the outside, it might be within you. Could you endure being tested to the limit, only to discover that the real door was never truly closed? The day after that solitary prayer atop the basilica dome, something changed at the Vatican. Guards reported a different presence, a heavier silence, an air that seemed to carry electricity, as if something were about to happen, though no one knew what. Leo XIV didn't come down for breakfast. He didn't meet with diplomats. He didn't reply to the world's messages. He locked himself in the Chapel of Lamentation, a forgotten place built centuries ago for silent penitents, where even cardinals don't enter without invitation. There, he remained on his knees for hours. He wept. He tore his ceremonial garments. He also tore protocols. But most of all, he tore his pride. And it was then that a verse he had recited countless times throughout his priestly life, but had never let pierce his soul, finally broke through. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. John 8:32. The truth. He whispered it like someone afraid of the weight of his own words. The truth is that I was trying to be the builder of my own door, when in reality I am nothing but dust, waiting for the eternal door to find me. At that moment he opened the manuscript he had received weeks earlier, the one with the unknown seal, and read it again, now aloud. Behold, I have set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. Revelation 3:8. But this time, the second part of the verse struck his eyes like a divine arrow, because you have little strength, and have kept my word, and have not denied my name. And that's when everything made sense. It wasn't about the size of his faith. It was about the persistence of his faithfulness. When everything felt dead, God doesn't open doors for the strong. He opens them for the faithful. Maybe that's why the door in your life hasn't opened yet. Not because you are weak, but because you are still being tested as faithful. Leo XIV then wrote his final speech. But he didn't read it from the Vatican. He didn't broadcast it to the world. He wrote it by hand, sealed it in an envelope, and asked for it to be taken to St. Peter's Square at the exact moment of sunset, with the following instruction. Read this text when the sky is divided between light and darkness, because it is exactly then that the doors open. The envelope was opened before thousands of believers, and his final words, spoken through tears and trembling, were, "The impossible door will be opened. Not because you deserve it, but because God still honors those who do not deny his name." If you are hearing this now, share this word with someone who is about to give up. Like this video, comment below which city you're watching from, and send it to someone who needs to be reminded. God still opens doors where there are only walls. On the night following the reading of the speech in St. Peter's Square, something unusual happened. It wasn't a visible miracle. It wasn't an apparition, but everyone who was there felt it. They felt as if something invisible had moved above their heads, as if heaven itself had taken a deep breath. A weight they didn't even know they were carrying was lifted, subtly yet profoundly. And you? Have you ever felt that sensation? That something greater is drawing near, even when everything still looks the same? That's what many described that night. And that's what marked the beginning of what came to be called the Week of the Impossible. 7 days during which testimonies began to emerge in inexplicable ways. Reports came from all corners of the world. A father who hadn't seen his son for years received an unexpected call. A woman on the verge of suicide entered a church exactly as a stranger was reading the speech aloud. A doctor who was about to amputate a child's leg suddenly stopped the procedure by intuition, and the next day, scans showed complete healing. And all of these testimonies had one thing in common. They happened exactly at 6:33 p.m., the time when the envelope was opened in the square. What was it about that number? Leo XIV, in his journals, revealed that 6:33 p.m. was the exact time that centuries earlier the great bell of the basilica was rung for the first time after the construction of the dome. It was the toll that sealed the completion of a work that once seemed impossible, a work that took generations, a work born of faith, just like your life. Because maybe what God is building in you also takes time, also requires silence, also passes through dark nights. But when the bell tolls, when the prophetic time is released, no wall can stand against it. And there's more. In the Vatican's secret archives, Leo XIV revealed he had dreamed of 7 keys. Each one represented a surrender, a weight left behind, a broken lie, a total offering. These 7 keys were spiritual, and at the end of the 7th, the door opened by itself, because there was no longer resistance within the one waiting. The greatest lock wasn't on the door, it was in the heart of the one wanting to walk through it. Could it be that God is still waiting for you to let go of what needs to be left behind? Could it be that the impossible hasn't come, because there is still something clinging to your soul that cannot enter the next season? The door is ready, the time is set, but only those light enough to be led will enter. What would you do if you knew the key to your impossible door lies in something you must surrender? That was the somber conclusion Leo XIV reached during his final solitary vigil. In the early hours of the 4th day, he returned to the Chapel of Lamentation, but this time he brought with him a small object he had always kept close, hidden from everyone. An aged leather bracelet with a hand-engraved Latin inscription, Fiat voluntas mea, translation, let my will be done. It was a silent reminder from his youth, from a time when he still believed he could shape the world with his own decisions. But now, after all the visions, silences, and revelations, that object had become a burden, a symbol of pride disguised as spirituality. He laid it at the foot of the cross without saying a word. That same night, he dreamed of the door again. But this time, it opened before him, and on the other side, there was only an empty field, silent, white. There was no throne, no crowd, no lights, only a field, and a voice that said, "The door does not take you where you want to go. It takes you where you need to go, and what you need is to start over." Could you bear starting from scratch? With no guarantees, no applause, no safety net, because many times what God is preparing on the other side of your door is not a public victory, but a secret new beginning. Leo XIV then wrote in his journal, "God's impossible begins where human control ends. If I want to enter through this door, I must strip away everything I've built with my own hands." Maybe that's your condition too. You've been asking God to do it, to open it, to change it. But what if it's you who needs to let go of what's been blocking the process? The pride, the bitterness, the desire to control, the idolatry disguised as plans, the comparisons with others, the fear of loss, the need to understand before obeying. These are the real locks. The word says, "Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it." Matthew 16:25. In other words, the impossible door only opens for those willing to die inside, to die to their own will, to their own certainties, to their own titles. The Pope understood this late, but he understood it in time. And you? Are you willing to cross that door, even if it doesn't lead where you wanted, but where God wants to take you? Have you realized that sometimes the greatest door God opens is the one that scares you the most, That was the feeling that overtook Leo XIV after all the surrender, all the renunciation, and all the brokenness. He finally heard a new divine instruction. It didn't come through a dream, nor a vision. It came as a soft, unmistakable voice in his spirit. Now speak. Tell everyone that the door is already open. But the Pope hesitated, because he knew what it meant. He knew it wasn't a word of motivation. He knew it wasn't about instant miracles or stage blessings. It was a calling, a warning, a confrontation. It was time to announce that God was shifting invisible structures, and that those not standing in faith would be swallowed by their own fear. For 3 days, he remained silent. And finally, at the dawn of the 8th day, he wrote with red ink a declaration to be read in all dioceses around the world. The door that God has opened will not be visible to the carnal eye. It will only be seen by those who still have oil in their lamps, those who lost everything but remained faithful, those who cried but did not blaspheme, those who were betrayed but did not turn their backs on heaven. To them, the door stands at their feet, and it only takes one step of faith to walk through it. The whole world stopped to listen. And you? Have you stopped to consider that your next great victory may not come with a trumpet? It won't be preceded by applause, by human confirmations, or by guarantees. Maybe it will come in silence, when you are faithful in the little, when no one is watching, when you obey without knowing why, because God doesn't open doors for the vain. He opens them for those who have the courage to walk in the dark, trusting that the light will come afterward. Leo XIV also said, "The prophetic time that begins now is for the obedient, not for the anxious, not for the impatient, but for those who have learned to wait with a clean heart." And maybe that is the key missing in your life. You've prayed, you've fasted, you've asked, you've screamed. But have you cleaned your heart? Have you forgiven those who hurt you? Have you repented for what you did in secret? Have you torn the invisible pacts tying you to the past? Because the door is open, but not everyone is ready to enter. Are you ready to cross, even if no one else goes with you? Because that's exactly how Leo XIV departed. After declaring to the world that the door was open, he didn't wait for tributes. He didn't seek recognition. He held no ceremony. He simply left a short and personal message to his closest collaborators. "Do not look for me. From this day forward, I follow the door the world cannot see." And he departed, his destination unknown. Days later, eyewitnesses claimed to have seen him walking alone along a stone path in the countryside of Tuscany. He wore only a simple white tunic, no insignias, no papal ring, no entourage. He didn't speak. He just walked, with his eyes fixed on the sky. Some thought he had lost his mind. Others understood. He had finally crossed over, because when God opens an impossible door, it does not lead you to the center of the crowd. It leads you back to the place where you and God walk alone. Like Enoch, like Abraham, leaving Ur without knowing where he was going, like Elijah walking toward Horeb, like Jesus carrying the cross down a dark path, surrounded by mockers, but knowing that on the other side of pain there would be resurrection. Leo XIV disappeared for 40 days, and at the end of that period a single video was published in his name, recorded on a simple cell phone, with no edits, no soundtrack, no effects. It was him, sitting beneath an olive tree, his eyes full of tears, his face marked by the golden light of sunset. And he said, "I saw it. The door is not made of wood, nor of iron, nor of gold. The door is made of obedience. And when you obey, even without understanding, it opens before you." And you realize that the impossible was just a name men give to what has not yet surrendered to God. That was the last public trace of the Pope. His name remains on the office, but his figure has become symbolic. a living representation that, yes, the impossible door does open, but only for those who dare to vanish from human control to live in the supernatural plan of God. And now the question returns to you. Are you still waiting for the door to open, or are you ready to take the step that will make it open? Because some promises will not come with signs. They will come with solitary decisions, with narrow paths, with invisible sacrifices. But when you take that step, you will see the door was always there, waiting for your faith. And what if I told you that the impossible door God is about to open is not to exalt you, but to hide you? Because that is the great revelation Leo XIV left in his final note, a small handwritten message found between the pages of the book of Isaiah, on the altar of the chapel where he used to pray in silence. The note said, "The world seeks stages, God builds caves, because it is in the cave that he whispers impossible secrets. And it is there that he forges those who will cross the door of the invisible." The verse marked was Isaiah 22:22. "I will place on his shoulder the key to the house of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open." The promise was not for those who shout. It was for those who carry the key, for those who bear the weight, for those who understand that opening doors in the spiritual world comes with a price of blood, surrender, and sacrifice. Leo XIV understood that late, and for that reason, he disappeared, not to flee, but to fulfill. He became the key. And you? Do you still expect the door to be just a blessing, a financial breakthrough, a family reconciliation, a new season? Or have you already understood that the door is a calling, a breaking point between what you want and what God wants to do through you? Because the impossible that God is about to release is not about you. It's about who will be reached after you cross through it. And maybe that's why it's taking so long. Because there's still pride, there's still resistance, there's still vanity. And the door doesn't open for those who want glory. It opens for those who want to glorify. We've reached the end of this journey, but maybe now is when yours truly begins. Like this video, comment below which city you're watching from, and share this message with someone who needs to hear God still opens impossible doors, but he only opens them for those willing to vanish from the human map to appear on the eternal one. Pope Leo XIV, final speech, the end.